This video follows directly on from Chapter 1, so if you haven't seen that already, I suggest watching it first. We met our hero, Ryo Hazuki, on a wintry day in 1986. After coming home to the family dojo midway through a break-in, Ryo witnesses his father's murder at the hands of a Chinese stranger, Lan Di. The only clues regarding the motive are a brief moment of recognition between victim and killer, and the theft of a mysterious dragon mirror. The date of the murder, November 29, 1986, is significant for another reason. It's Ryo's birthday, his 18th to be exact, and with Lan Di still at large and the dojo now bereft of its patriarch, Ryo becomes the head of the house and makes the decision to hunt down his father's killer. Once the opening cutscene finished, it was clear that this game was a different beast altogether, and I was instantly hooked. If you're familiar with the games already, you know that the dragon mirror Lan Di stole has a counterpart, the Phoenix mirror, and it's Ryo's link to this mirror that informs my next theory. Bear with me while I find my tinfoil hat. Although the mirror is translated as the Phoenix mirror, the bird itself is not the Greek phoenix as we know it in the West. The Japanese release calls it the Ho-Oh, referring to China's mythical fenghuang, a great bird that's often paired with the dragon. There are a number of birds in Chinese mythology that share similarities with the Western phoenix, but none of them share the resurrection myth it's known for. Even so, I think it's fair to say that after the death of his father, Ryo underwent a change, a kind of thematic rebirth. For lack of a better expression, his whole sense of self is reborn and directed into a new destiny. If we consider this thematic rebirth as taking place on November 29, 1986, that would place him directly in line with the tiger zodiac sign. You may have already noticed the exceptionally blurry tiger decal on the back of Ryo's jacket. I think this is significant in regards to Lan Di, who's designed with obvious dragon imagery in mind. Ultimately, I bring this up because there's a Chinese idiom that refers to the tiger and the dragon being linked by destiny, with the dragon deriving its power from patience and wisdom, while the tiger lunges headfirst into battle. Sounds pretty familiar based on that first scene. The part that interests me most, especially regarding the future of Shenmue, is that neither beast is said to be able to conquer the other. This could prove especially interesting the next time Ryo and Lan Di meet face to face. There's nothing in character design that isn't carefully considered beforehand, so I have to say this is probably deliberate symbolism rather than pure coincidence. Another connection in favour of this idea is the euphemistic way the residents refer to Iwao's death. Time and time again they call it the day the snow turned to rain. For a long time I thought this was a cultural way of hushing up the reality of the situation, but it turns out that Chinese dragons are said to be the rulers of water and weather, with the dragon god being the dispenser of rain. It's a very cool connection, and would have went right over my head if my brother hadn't pointed it out. Either way, it's undeniable that a massive change has occurred within Ryo's life, and the ramifications are great. Idling at the title screen reveals a prophecy that supports this idea, and it's loosely hinted at throughout both games, but the details are vague, and as of right now it's not clear just how supernatural or celestial Ryo's destiny may be. Earlier this year, Yu Suzuki stated that there are no supernatural elements in Shenmue 3, but that doesn't necessarily rule them out of future entries in the series, and I'm very curious to see how earlier drafts intended to use them, as they've been implied in various trailers. All in all, it's a dramatic intro and a seemingly circular revenge story, but most importantly it's presented well. The music and cinematography feel grand and high budget, and the graphics are very impressive for their time. I'd say that they're still impressive in a lot of ways. And while Shenmue relies heavily on classic martial arts tropes, it more than makes up for it in its execution of those ideas. I mention the story above all else because it's a big part of what kept me attached after all this time. I still can't help myself asking questions that have so far remained unanswered. Who is Lan Di? Why did Iwao Hazuki supposedly kill Sun Ming? And what's the significance of the stone mirrors? The opening cutscene asks all these questions and more, and does so in a way that gives curious minds like mine just enough information to play with. The reason I call it a circular revenge story is because the dialogue indicates a history between Iwao and Lan Di that may be reflective of the relationship Ryo and Lan Di now share, with one act of revenge spurring another, and so on. Without knowing precisely why Iwao killed Sun Ming, we can only guess, but considering Iwao's reputation as a man of honor, and the fantastical powers prophesized within the stone mirrors, we can only hope that it was for the right reasons. After all, no parent is perfect, and it's not yet clear how honourable Ryo's father was as a much younger man. Either way, we'll add it to the list of never-ending questions. What's important is how well this opening scene lays the groundwork and tone for the rest of the game. Notice how the camera is always in motion. As far as I can tell, this is true across the entire game, giving off a curious momentum and energy. When paired with the brilliant and beautiful score, it lends a sense of either looming unease or peaceful tranquility that I find characteristic of Shenmue. Focal length, depth, framing, blocking, and motion have all been carefully considered in each of these shots, and achieve a level of fidelity beyond standard expectation. There's a definite attempt at reproducing the language of film in order to better tell this story, and I find it very effective. With powerful modern hardware, credible human motion was becoming more desirable in games, and Yu Suzuki had set his sights on making it happen. From Virtua Fighter 2 onwards, AM2 took the bold steps of using early motion capture to lend authenticity to their combats. With the increase in story and cutscenes within Shenmue, it only made sense to do the same. As a result, there's a tangible weight and foundation to the characters and drama. This was clearly the right move, as over 20 years later the cutscenes still evoke an emotional response. As for gameplay, originally starting out as a Virtua Fighter RPG for the Sega Saturn under the codename Project Berkeley, Shenmue retains its martial arts roots in the form of free battles. These are fully controllable fights that occur with one or more enemies in a 3D space. AM2 managed to tread a forgiving balance between accessibility and depth by favouring simple combos over complex button inputs and allowing you to expand your moveset via training and move scrolls. Amateur detective work is conducted in the overworld, where you search for clues and items and talk with various NPCs to gain insight. Points of interest are then added to your notebook to help you keep track. This might be considered an open-world game, but it utilises a much smaller sandbox compared to other titles in the genre, and its densely curated town is more of an aquarium than the open seas. Finally, QuickTime events are used sporadically to push the plot forward in action cinematics, and despite their modern reputation, surprisingly did a great job of making me feel connected to the action on screen. I'll cover each of these elements in greater detail shortly. A big part of Shenmue's overall feel is the freedom it gives you to unravel the plot at your own pace. It's an illusion, of course, like all games are, but it's a compelling one. With a number of different ways to reach the same conclusions, each of my playthroughs have felt uniquely fresh depending on who I talked to and when. This freedom is encapsulated by the design philosophy FREE. The acronym FREE stands for Full Reactive Eyes Entertainment, a phrase coined to describe the level of detail and immersion present in Shenmue. To me, this is one of the defining factors that separates Shenmue from other games. Even before I stepped outside Ryo's house, I was impressed at how much I could explore compared to other games, and how my curiosity was being rewarded rather than ignored.
It's just a cockroach.
Every drawer, cupboard, and cabinet can be opened, and items are picked up and examined in 3D space, some of which provide backstory and context, like the letter and photographs, while others, such as the move scroll, improve your compatibility. There's also a time-travelling, fourth-wall-breaking Sega Saturn you can play with, providing you find the games for it. When I finally stepped outside, there was a realistic day and night cycle. Dogs bark in the distance, fish swim in the pond, and bizarrely enough, the developers even went so far as to replicate real-world weather from 1986. At first glance, this isn't terribly important. After all, who's going to notice this kind of detail? And more than that, who's going to verify it? But it goes to show how sincere the effort was to immerse you in this time and place by surrounding you in meticulous design. This kind of dedication is present in almost every facet of the game. Just listen to how deliciously crunchy this snow sounds. Deals were cut with famous brands like Coca-Cola and Timex to include their products, which I've read that Sega paid them for rather than the other way around. If that's really true, and I admit I couldn't find the interview I originally read this from, I expect it's a big part of why Shenmue ballooned well over budget, and probably why they were ultimately cut from the Western and HD re-releases. What I could find, and this is hot off the presses at least by my slow standards, is that Shenmue wasn't just developed for the Sega Saturn and then redeveloped on the Dreamcast. There was another platform in between, The Black Belt was Sega's development kit intended to be a candidate for the Saturn's successor, and considering the graphical fidelity of the Project Berkeley trailer, the Black Belt may be where the original footage comes from. No doubt this put the budget well over the forecasts, and it's a testament to the amount of faith Sega had in Yu Suzuki's vision. Minus the unsolved parental murder, Ryo's home city of Yokosuka is a cozy and idyllic example of Japanese life. There's an ebb and flow to your surroundings that give off a comfortable familiarity, and as you explore you meet a wide variety of non-playable characters who are all fully fleshed out in their own right. It doesn't have as many NPCs as some games, but all of them are unique. These are characters who are fully voice acted and interactive throughout most of the story, which goes a long way towards humanizing them. Even if they don't always have a lot to say, you can still probe them for clues and directions, and for the most part they'll be pretty forthcoming with information. I know a lot of people criticize the delivery, what with the intonation being a little flat or off-key, but I think it sounds charming nonetheless.
Hey, you're still here? If you're done, go on, get out.
Yes.
By letting you explore the everyday humdrum of someone else's life, you can't help but relate with them, and I found myself deliberately seeking them out to satisfy my own curiosity. This is where Shenmue shines, because it offers you a window into each character's life, and through the slow drip of information through observation and repeated interaction, you can't help but enjoy their quirks. Speak to enough of them and you gradually get a picture of how Ryo is perceived in his community. He's quite a closed-off character by default, understandably so given his loss and newfound status as head of his household, so he doesn't give much back conversationally, but it's clear that he's well respected and well liked outside of his association with the dojo. This is fascinating because over time you build up a mental picture of how everyone is connected. It's an exercise in implied story, and after walking past these people every day, I began to build a mental picture of how everything is more sprawling and interwoven than it first seemed. By sheer osmosis and curiosity, I found myself invested far more in certain characters than I ever expected. Dobuita has this kinetic energy and momentum that makes you feel as if it could carry on whether you're there or not. Each character has their own unique routines inspired by their own individual aspirations. Much like real life, they believe they're the stars of their own stories, and as a result, their presence feels very organic. As always, thank you for watching part 2 of my ongoing series on Shenmue. Join me again next time as we invest all of our savings into capsule toys and arcade machines. See you next time.